This is the story of a man the system tried to forget. But truth doesn't die that easily.
The cell was cold, smaller than most closets, and for 30 years, this was his world. Every sunrise bled through the bars like a thin blade of mercy that never reached him. The concrete walls whispered names of men who'd come and gone, some freed, most forgotten. His name was Raymond Holt, 22 when he was arrested, 52 when he'd finally see daylight again. The charge, murder. The evidence, shaky at best. The truth, buried beneath power, politics, and fear. On paper, the system worked. In reality, it destroyed him. The trial was quick. The witnesses rehearsed. The public defender silent. When the verdict was read, guilty, Raymond didn't shout, didn't cry. He simply stared at the floor, as if the ground had opened and swallowed every dream he ever had. For the next 3 decades, he lived in the shadow of a lie. But in a country built on promises of justice, how could an innocent man disappear for half a lifetime? This is the story of truth delayed, and the cost of waiting for it. This is Blood and Justice. It was a humid July evening in 1992 when police stormed into Raymond Holt's small apartment. The neighborhood was already tense, a man had been murdered 2 blocks away, and someone needed to take the fall. Raymond was a mechanic. Quiet. Worked late. Kept to himself. But that night, his face fit the story they wanted to tell. He was dragged from his home in handcuffs as flashlights cut through the darkness, his neighbors whispering from behind torn curtains. At the precinct, detectives fed him a story, "We know you did it. Just tell us why." Hours turned to days. No lawyer. No sleep. Just a man trying to survive an interrogation designed to break him. When he finally signed the paper, a confession he didn't understand, it sealed his fate. The trial was a performance. A prosecutor eager for headlines. A defense attorney who never called a single witness. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. As the word guilty echoed through the courtroom, Raymond's mother collapsed in the back row. And the system, efficient, polished, merciless, moved on to its next case. But this one wouldn't stay buried forever. The first night inside was the longest of his life. The clang of iron doors closing behind him sounded final, like the world itself had decided to move on without him. Raymond had never seen anything like it. The smell of sweat, bleach, and hopelessness clung to the air. The older inmates watched silently as the new arrivals were processed, numbers replacing names, orange jumpsuits replacing identities. A guard handed him a thin mattress and muttered, "Welcome home." He didn't sleep that night. He listened, to distant screams, to the buzz of flickering lights, to the shuffle of boots on concrete. Every sound was a reminder, this was his reality now. Days blurred into weeks. Weeks into months. He learned when to talk, when to stay quiet, when to keep his head down. But the hardest part wasn't the violence or the fear, it was knowing he didn't belong there. Each passing day carved a little more hope out of him, until the man who once dreamed of fixing engines began fixing broken radios just to remember what purpose felt like. Innocence didn't matter here. Survival did. Inside those concrete walls, justice had a different meaning. The prison was a world built on fear, power, and quiet deals. Guards looked the other way, gangs ran the tiers, and violence was the language everyone understood. Raymond tried to keep his distance. He wasn't built for this world. He worked in the laundry room, folded sheets, cleaned floors, and stayed invisible. But in prison, staying invisible can make you a target. One night, a fight broke out near his cell. A shank flashed, blood sprayed the wall, and the alarm blared. The next morning, a guard dragged Raymond from his bunk, accused of being involved. No questions. No hearing. Straight to solitary confinement. For 30 days, he sat alone in a room the size of a coffin. No window. No sound but his own breathing. That's when it hit him, The system that claimed to seek truth didn't care about truth at all. It only cared about order, even if it meant burying another innocent man deeper in the dark. And in that silence, Raymond made himself a promise: if no one believed him, he'd learn how to fight for himself. Solitary confinement breaks most men. But for Raymond Holt, it became the place where his silence turned into something else: resolve. On the 17th day, a letter slipped under his door. No return address, just a few words written in a trembling hand. "I believe you." At first, he thought it was a cruel joke. But days later, another note came, this one from a prison volunteer named Sister Elaine, a retired teacher who ran a literacy program. She'd heard his story through another inmate and wanted to help. Every week, she sent him books about the law, wrongful convictions, and the men who fought back. And slowly, Raymond began to see the patterns: coerced confessions, lazy investigations, prosecutors rewarded for convictions, not truth. The system wasn't broken by accident. It was built this way. When he was finally released from solitary, Raymond walked back into the yard different. He no longer looked down at the ground. He carried a notebook filled with questions that scared the very people who had put him there. For the first time in years, hope had a name. Sister Elaine didn't stop at letters. From her small office lined with old typewriters and stacks of legal papers, she began digging. Court records, police reports, witness statements, all of it told the same story: convenience over truth. The victim, a local store owner, had been killed during a robbery gone wrong. The main witness, a teenage boy, had identified Raymond in a photo lineup after a 12-hour interrogation. Later, that same boy recanted, saying the detectives told him who to choose. Elaine wrote every week, sending Raymond updates. Each envelope became a lifeline, a connection to the world that had forgotten him. One day, she sent a copy of the interrogation transcript. Reading it, Raymond felt sick. His so-called confession was filled with details only the police could have known. Words he never said. Sentences he never formed. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bunk, the letter shaking in his hand. For the first time in 30 years, he saw a path, faint, distant, but real. Truth wasn't gone. It was buried. And now, someone was finally digging it up. Months passed. Elaine's letters grew thicker, filled with photocopies, notes, and small pieces of a puzzle that no one had cared to solve. One envelope contained a police evidence log, and at the bottom, in faded ink, was a single line that changed everything. Fingerprint found at scene, unidentified. That fingerprint had never been entered into the system. It was quietly filed away, forgotten. But Elaine's persistence pushed it back into light. She sent requests to every agency she could reach. Most ignored her. One finally responded: the print had never matched Raymond. The implications were massive. The prosecution's entire case had hinged on that coerced confession. Without it, there was no physical evidence tying him to the murder. Raymond read the letter 3 times before it sank in. For 30 years, the proof of his innocence had been sitting in a file cabinet, gathering dust. He laughed, not from joy, but from disbelief. The system that took his life had the truth all along, and simply didn't care to look. The fight was no longer about freedom. It was about exposing the lie. The fingerprint matched someone after all: Leonard Briggs, a local drifter with a long record of robbery and assault. But there was a problem: Briggs had died in 2003. Elaine couldn't believe it. The man whose print was found at the scene was never questioned, never listed as a suspect. When she pulled his file, something even stranger appeared: Briggs had once been a police informant. It explained everything. The detectives couldn't risk exposing that one of their own protected sources had committed murder. So they found someone easier to blame: Raymond Holt. Elaine sent her findings to a small non-profit legal group that handled innocence cases. Within weeks, they agreed to reopen the investigation. But inside the prison walls, Raymond knew what that meant: retaliation. Guards suddenly lost his mail. His phone privileges vanished. Whispers spread that he was stirring up trouble. He was close to freedom, and closer than ever to danger. But there was no turning back. For the first time, the world beyond those bars was beginning to hear his name, and the truth was louder than the silence that had buried him for 30 years. The legal team from the Innocence Project arrived one gray afternoon in 2018. Raymond had almost given up hope they were real. He'd heard of them on a small prison radio show years earlier, helping men like him who were buried by bad convictions. The lawyers, young and sharp-eyed, sat with him in a cramped visitation room. They listened, really listened, as he told his story, piece by piece, year by year. When they left, Raymond felt something he hadn't felt in years: belief. Not pity. Not sympathy. Belief. The team filed motion after motion, demanding DNA tests, reanalysis of evidence, and disclosure of hidden police reports. The district attorney's office pushed back, arguing finality, that the case was too old, too settled, too forgotten. But truth doesn't expire. One of the young attorneys, Maya Lee, found something crucial: a recorded interview never presented at trial, where the key witness hesitated, changed his story, and admitted the detectives told him what to say. It was the spark they needed. After 3 decades, the system that silenced him was about to speak again, this time, in his favor. 30 years after the verdict that destroyed his life, the same courthouse opened its doors to Raymond Holt once more. Only this time, he wasn't the defendant, he was the man demanding the truth. The hearing drew little attention at first. A few reporters. Some old locals who remembered the original trial. But when the Innocence Project released their findings, the hidden fingerprint, the coerced confession, the missing witness tape, the room fell silent. The prosecutor tried to argue it was harmless error. But the judge wasn't convinced. He ordered a full evidentiary review. For Raymond, sitting in that courtroom felt surreal. He could still see the faces from decades earlier, jurors who had believed lies, police who'd smirked as the cuffs clicked shut. Now, those same lies were unraveling under fluorescent light. Elaine sat in the back row, hands clasped tightly, tears in her eyes. She had waited years to hear those words. The court grants a new trial. After 30 years of being silenced, Raymond's truth was finally allowed to be heard. And once it started, it couldn't be stopped. The retrial began on a rainy morning. Reporters filled the hallways now. The story of the man who lost 30 years had spread across the state. On the stand, one of the original detectives, now retired, looked uneasy. He fumbled through his testimony as the defense replayed the old interrogation tape. The voice on the recording was calm, rehearsed, leading questions, quiet threats. "You want to go home, don't you, Raymond? Just sign the statement, son." The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on the screen. Then came the bombshell. The teenage witness, now a grown man, testified via video call. His voice shook as he admitted the truth. "They told me to pick him. They said they already knew it was him." Gasps echoed through the room. The prosecutor didn't even try to recover. The lies, the cover-up, the manipulation, all of it lay bare for the world to see. Raymond sat motionless, tears welling in his eyes. He had dreamed of this moment for decades, but now that it was here, it didn't feel real. After 30 years of silence, justice was finally speaking, loud enough for everyone to hear. The morning of his release was strangely quiet. No press conferences. No parade. Just a gray sky and a slow creak of iron doors opening for the last time. Raymond stepped out carrying a small brown box, his belongings from 3 decades of captivity, a Bible, a few letters from Sister Elaine, and a photo of his mother, long gone now. As he crossed the threshold, the cold air hit his face like a baptism. He paused, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." Cameras waited by the gate, but he didn't stop. He didn't need to speak, the silence said enough. Elaine was there, her eyes red from crying, holding a coat she'd brought for him. She whispered, "You're free now, Raymond." He smiled, a faint, trembling smile, the kind that only comes from a man who's seen too much darkness to ever take light for granted. 30 years stolen. But in that single moment, the world seemed to give him a heartbeat back. And though the system never said it out loud, the truth was finally written where everyone could see it. He was innocent. Freedom, Raymond soon learned, was its own kind of prison. The city he left in 1992 didn't exist anymore. Payphones were gone. Cashiers didn't smile. Everyone stared down at glowing screens that connected them to everything except each other. He lived in a halfway house at first, sleeping in a room smaller than his old cell. At night, he'd wake up expecting the sound of metal doors slamming, or guards shouting for head count. The world had moved on without him. His mother was buried years ago. His friends had vanished. The mechanic shop he once worked in was now a convenience store. Elaine visited often, reminding him that healing takes time. But even she could see it, 30 years behind bars doesn't fade like a scar. It becomes part of you. Raymond found solace in the small things: morning walks, quiet coffee shops, the sound of rain on open windows. He started speaking at community events, sharing his story with young men who thought they understood justice. And though freedom felt fragile, he held on to it with both hands, because it was finally his. Freedom didn't erase the scars, it only made them visible. Raymond filed a civil lawsuit against the city, the police department, and the prosecutors who built their careers on his conviction. It wasn't about money, it was about acknowledgement. But justice, even when it's right, moves slowly. The state fought back, arguing qualified immunity, claiming no one could be personally blamed for what happened 30 years ago. The detectives who lied were retired. The prosecutor who buried evidence had become a judge. In interviews, Raymond spoke calmly, "They took everything from me, and they're still free." Public pressure grew. News outlets ran stories, podcasts debated accountability, and politicians offered empty apologies. Months later, the city quietly settled. The number wasn't huge, a few $1 million. Enough to survive, but not enough to undo 30 years of lost time. Raymond didn't smile when he signed the papers. He just whispered, "This doesn't buy justice." Because for men like him, justice isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in years stolen, and in the faces of those who never said sorry. Raymond Holt never became famous. He didn't want to. His story wasn't about headlines or heroism, it was about survival, truth, and the quiet strength it takes to stand against a machine built to crush you. He started a small foundation, the Holt Project, to help other wrongfully convicted men and women fight for freedom. He visited prisons, spoke to law students, and reminded them that justice without humanity is just another word for control. Every time he told his story, someone in the crowd cried. Every time he showed his mugshot, someone asked, "How did this happen?" The answer was always the same: because no one was watching. Raymond passed away peacefully in 2023, sitting by his window, sunlight spilling across his hands. On his desk lay an old letter, the first one from Sister Elaine, the one that said, "I believe you." 30 years stolen. One life reclaimed. His story became a reminder, not just of injustice, but of resilience. Because for every Raymond Holt still waiting in the dark, there's someone out there willing to turn on the light. This is Blood and Justice.